Welcome back to GB News. You're watching the Camilla Tominey Show. I'm delighted to be joined now by former Chancellor Kwasi Kwarteng, who's in the studio with me. Kwasi, where should we begin? Hello, nice to see you. Should we begin on Farage?
Yeah, why not?
What do you think?
I think this Putin thing is very bad for him because he presents himself as a normal guy, man in the pub with a beer. And this is quite cranky stuff to say somehow the West were responsible for Putin's act of aggression.
I mean, let's not take him out of context. He has sort of clarified but also doubled down today in the Mail on Sunday. He's given that interview to the political editor, Glenn Owen. And he said, look, I think Putin's invasion was wrong and deplorable, but at the same time, the West must take some responsibility. And he's not just saying that the West was asleep at the wheel after Crimea. He's also saying that all of that talk in the EU about Ukraine membership and indeed NATO membership by Ukraine, I mean, that would mean that NATO takes on Putin in the event of an invasion.
So the point that Nigel makes, which is true, everyone agrees with, is that Ukraine was a sovereign country, OK? So if it's a sovereign country, it can join any alliance that it wants. And so this idea that somehow we, the West, were poking the bear, I think is straight out of Vladimir Putin's talking points.
Yeah.
And it gives him a justification, which he doesn't have. What he did was illegal and wrong. Nigel acknowledges that. And that's the end of the story. The idea that somehow the West are as culpable or somehow responsible for his illegal acts, I think is wrong.
So you're saying it's cranky, it's sort of conspiracy
I think it is a little bit. I mean, if you look at the people in Europe who support Putin or who express admiration for him, these are often very hard right parties. You know, people like Viktor Orban, people like Marine Le Pen.
Well, people like Donald Trump, I guess.
And I don't think even Donald Trump has blamed the West in the way or fingered the West for responsibility in the way that Nigel did. And I think a lot of voters who are interested in what he had to say will be thinking, hang on a sec, this is a bit bizarre, this is a bit cranky, I'm not quite comfortable with giving my support to this man and his party. And I think that, well, let's see, I think that they might well have peaked reform. I don't want to predict that.
No.
But I don't see how he's winning more voters by saying that somehow the West is responsible for Putin's aggression.
I mean, obviously he's rising in the polls, and I'm going to speak to Scarlett Maguire of JL Partners later in the show just to discuss where reform are at and where they could peak and whether they'll stay there. You know, if they get a vote share beginning with a 2...
That's a big problem.
That's a massive problem for the Tories. How have the Tories let this happen?
No, I mean, I think it's but the biggest problem. I mean, we were going into this campaign, we thought that, the Tories were under pressure. But now that Farage, they're only about 11% at the beginning when the election was called. Yeah. Now they're rising up to sort of 16, 17%. That's hugely damaging for the Conservatives.
Over 20 in a couple of polls.
Yes. And so I think if they get anywhere near that, you'll see lots of Tory seats, Tory MPs.
According to Michael Gove, this is all your fault. Well, you and Liz Truss, let's just get the quote here. The Housing Secretary said the chances of re-election had taken a bit of a knock because of the former Prime Minister's disastrous mini-budget. He refused to name Ms Truss, but instead referred to the period between Boris and Rishi, which is when you were Chancellor.
That's right.
Kwasi.
So
is it your fault?
Look, no, I think obviously if there is a defeat, blame will be apportioned to lots of different people.
Right. So you're preparing your tin hat, are you?
Yeah, absolutely. But this idea that Rishi Sunak, who called the election when he did, when no one was expecting it, least of all the party, it would appear, who has been front and centre of the campaign, under whom reform have risen to nearly 20%. Yeah. The idea that he had nothing to do with any of that is wrong. So when I left office, I was just checking out through the polls just now. Reform were on about 4%. Yeah. I think when Liz Truss left in October 2022, they were 4 or 5%. And now they're on 17%. Yes. And for Michael Gove to say...
Although Farage hadn't decided to kind of commit fully to the party when you were obviously
That's true, but I'm saying that all of this has happened.
So what you're saying is actually, if he loses badly and the Conservative Party ends up being destroyed, it's Rishi Sunak's fault.
Look, I'm trying to be nuaused.
Well,
you can't blame. You can't put 100% of the blame on him.
Well, how much blame would you put on him?
But he's clearly the leader. If you suffer a massive defeat, clearly the leader is very much responsible for that. Yes. I mean, what proportion? I don't know. Yeah. Obviously, there were other mistakes done by other leaders. But he is and also what's so bizarre is that he called the time of the election. We wouldn't be talking about this.
Was that a mistake? July the 4th?
I think it was. I could see why he did it. But as it's turned out, it looks like it could well backfire. Because
green shoots are being seen, Kwasi.
Yeah, that's right.
We've got inflation down.
Exactly. And the fact that he didn't let that bed in was his call.
But he's then going to end up with a much worse legacy than Liz Truss, isn't he?
Well, this wasn't there very long, frankly.
Yeah,
I mean,
but
we
the
were there for
legacy
7
of Rishi
weeks.
Sunak, if these seat projections are true, I mean, first of all, do you think that the Tories could be reduced at the worst estimate? It was the Savanta poll for the Telegraph in the week, 53
I don't
seats.
believe that. I don't believe that.
Where do you think they might end up?
I mean, I don't have a crystal ball, nor have I put a bet on this.
No, thank you.
And I don't have any inside information.
Before we get on to betting, though, if his legacy ends up being the complete annihilation of the Conservative Party...
It's not a good legacy.
It's going to make Liz the lettuce look, like a good addition to the fridge.
Well, look, there'll be lots of recriminations if we do lose that badly. There'll be lots of debate. People will be blaming each other. Everyone will be blaming everyone else. But the leader has to take responsibility. The leader of the party has to take some responsibility.
Does he have to take responsibility vicariously for this betting fiasco? I mean, you've worked inside number 10 and number 11. What on earth is going on when you've got senior Tory people prioritising making a few quid on the side, allegedly, by placing wagers, rather than fighting for their political lives?
It's very bizarre. I thought it was very childish, very juvenile, and not serious.
Yeah.
And also incredibly stupid, because, I mean, how did they not think they might be caught?
But are people inside number 10 juvenile and childish and stupid?
Not generally. I think a lot of it is driven by the leadership, the culture.
What do you mean by that?
Well,
There's
look,
lots of Rishi fanboys and
I'm
girls.
old-fashioned.
Yeah.
Harry Truman used to have a sign on his desk when he was president, the buck stops here.
Yes.
I think there's a sense in which, and I said this about Boris, I've said this about Liz, the leader, whoever that is, bears ultimate responsibility for what happens under their watch. And sometimes it might be unfair. Maybe he didn't know what was going on.
Yeah.
But as the leader of an organisation, your character, your job is to impose some sort of discipline on the institution. And if things go wrong, ultimately, I know it's an old-fashioned view and people don't really subscribe to it anymore, but ultimately, I think the leader bears responsibility for what's going on.
But do you think that there are too many people in number 10 or around the Prime Minister who've sort of drunk the Kool-Aid and can't give him objective advice?
Well, look, I mean, there've been some blunders, let's face it, and he's admitted to them. I mean, the D-Day business was something that he put his hand up and said, look, I got it wrong. This was a mistake. And I don't know who was advising him on that. So this isn't the first time that people around the Prime Minister have not
what are Tory colleagues saying to you? Because obviously you're not standing.
No.
You're going to do something differently, do something different come July the 5th. But other people are standing. I mean, what are they saying to you?
I think it's very challenging. I think it's very challenging because each time we take a step forward locally, it seems that we're taking 2 steps back with various blunders and mistakes. I think as time progresses, we're in the last 10 days, 12 days of the campaign. My hope and expectation is that some of that reform vote will be squeezed. I think people will look at the Labour proposition and the Conservative proposition, and then many of them will vote Conservative.
Do you think there's some shy conservatism going on?
I think there is a bit of that.
To pollsters or their friends that they're going to vote Tory?
I think there is a bit of that.
So do you think the polls are going to narrow a little bit?
I hope so, and I expect that to be the case, but let's see. And we've been expecting that for weeks, and it hasn't happened.
What should Sunak do now with the last 12 days of this campaign? Because Alexander Downer, who I know you'll be familiar with, was in last week or the week before, basically saying all of this blue-on-blue attack and taking on reform is a waste of time. Just fire your guns on Starmer, talk about him wanting to reverse the referendum, talk about hidden taxes, stealth taxes. Just open fire on this guy and his party and his policies. Do you agree with that?
I think they've got to go after Labour, because if you try and go after reform, in a way you're sort of validating and you're keeping reform in the headlines. I think the line that there are only 2 people plausibly who can be Prime Minister after July the 5th, Keir Starmer on one side, Rishi Sunak on the other. And I think it's the job of the Conservative Party, and particularly the candidate, Rishi Sunak, to really focus his attention trying to dismantle what Labour... And Labour... The tricky thing is, Labour haven't said anything much.
No, they're just going to walk into a supermajority. But also, why are Tories still talking about the idea that they can win this? They can't, can they?
I think it's difficult, but stranger things have happened. I mean, look...
that's an understatement, Kwasi.
But I remember being traumatised by the 2017 general election. When that election was called, we were projected to have a 150 majority.
Yeah.
And in the end, we lost our majority. So that's really informed my reluctance to make predictions. It does look difficult, it does look challenging, but we're going to have to just wait and see.
All right. Somebody's going to be embarrassed on the morning of July the 5th. It's either going to be Rishi Sunak or it's going to be pollsters, perhaps.
I think the pollsters will face lots of questions if they get it wrong.
All right, Kwasi, I know you're with us over the course of the election coverage on GBNews, so we'll no doubt be speaking again. Thank you very much.